You don't belong here, and if you don't move to the back of the plane right now, I'll make sure you're dragged off in handcuffs." The words cut through the plush cabin of the Gulfstream G700 like a knife, sharp and venomous, spat out by a flight attendant whose icy glare matched her tone. The passengers froze, their eyes darting toward the woman at the center of this shocking outburst, a black woman seated calmly in the VIP section, her composure unshaken despite the public humiliation. What no one knew was that she held a secret that would turn the tables in a way no one could have predicted. If you believe everyone deserves respect, no matter who they are, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from, your city, your state, or maybe just your cozy living room. Now, let's dive into this story. It was a crisp September morning, and the tarmac at John F. Kennedy International Airport in New York City shimmered under the early sunlight. A sleek Gulfstream G700, worth a cool $78 million, stood ready for its transcontinental flight to Los Angeles. Inside, the cabin was a vision of luxury. Soft leather seats the color of warm caramel, polished mahogany paneling, and ambient lighting that felt like a five-star hotel floating in the sky. The air buzzed with the quiet confidence of wealth, as passengers, all from America's elite, boarded with their designer luggage and self-assured strides. Among them was Amara Johnson, a 42-year-old tech mogul and the founder of Horizon Airlines, a company valued at $2.3 billion, known for revolutionizing luxury air travel with cutting-edge technology and unmatched service. Amara, dressed in a tailored gray blazer and slacks, carried herself with a quiet elegance that didn't scream for attention. Her dark eyes scanned the cabin with purpose, but she chose to blend in, her demeanor understated. She was on her way to Los Angeles to finalize a $500 million investment deal to expand Horizon's fleet. But no one on board knew her true identity. Amara preferred it that way. She often traveled incognito to observe how her staff treated passengers, a habit rooted in her own experiences with prejudice early in her career. As she stepped into the cabin, her measured steps drew a few glances, but nothing more. The other passengers, a mix of old money families, Wall Street tycoons, and a smattering of celebrities, settled into their seats, some sipping champagne from crystal flutes, others scrolling through their phones. Amara took her place in seat 3A, a prime spot in the VIP section, and set her sleek leather briefcase under the seat. She pulled out a tablet, her fingers gliding over the screen as she reviewed notes for her upcoming meeting. Her calm presence was a stark contrast to the bustle around her, but it didn't go unnoticed by Rachel Bennett, the lead flight attendant, whose sharp eyes lingered on Amara a moment too long. Rachel, 45, was a veteran of the skies with 20 years of experience. Her Navy uniform was crisp, her auburn hair pulled into a flawless bun, but beneath her polished exterior was a woman worn down by the demands of her job and the weight of her own biases. Rachel prided herself on running a tight ship, but her idea of order often hinged on snap judgments about who belonged in her cabin. As she greeted passengers, her smile was warm for some, perfunctory for others. "Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. So lovely to see you again," she said, her voice dripping with charm as she offered sparkling water to an older couple, both in their late 60s, who exuded old money ease. Mr. Carter, a retired banker, nodded politely, while Mrs. Carter, clutching a small embroidery bag, smiled back. Rachel's warmth vanished when she turned to Amara. "Welcome aboard," she said curtly, her eyes narrowing as if sizing up whether Amara fit the mold of a VIP. Amara noticed the shift but didn't react. She'd faced this kind of subtle dismissal before, countless times. In fact, from boardrooms to boutiques, growing up in a working-class neighborhood in Chicago, she'd clawed her way to the top of the tech world, building Horizon from a startup in her garage to a powerhouse that rivaled legacy airlines. Along the way, she'd encountered enough raised eyebrows and skeptical glances to know what Rachel's look meant. But Amara had learned to pick her battles, and for now, she chose to observe, her expression serene as she settled into her seat. Across the aisle, Michael Torres, a 38-year-old real estate investor with a net worth of $50 million, glanced up from his laptop. Michael, with his easy smile and sharp suit, had a knack for reading people. He'd grown up in a modest Latino family in Miami. Working his way through college before striking it big in property development, he'd seen prejudice in action, sometimes aimed at him, and something about Rachel's tone toward Amara set his jaw tight. Nearby, Evelyn Harper, a 62-year-old socialite with a penchant for gossip, leaned toward her companion, a fellow member of her country club. "Who's she?" Evelyn whispered, her perfectly manicured nails tapping her champagne glass as she eyed Amara's understated attire. Evelyn, whose wealth came from her late husband's oil fortune, was quick to judge based on appearances, a habit she'd never questioned. Meanwhile, Sarah Miller, a 25-year-old junior flight attendant, hovered near the galley, her nerves evident in her fidgeting hands. Sarah was new to Horizon, just 6 months in, and still learning the ropes. She admired Rachel's confidence but often felt uneasy about her boss's sharp edges. Sarah had grown up in a small town in Ohio, where kindness was a currency her family valued above all. She sensed something off in Rachel's interaction with Amara, but stayed quiet, her fear of rocking the boat outweighing her instinct to speak up. The cabin hummed with soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, and the scent of fresh coffee wafted from the galley. Passengers chatted quietly, their voices a low murmur against the backdrop of luxury. Rachel moved through the aisle, checking seatbelts and offering pillows, her smile reserved for those she deemed worthy, when she passed Amara. She didn't offer so much as a glance, her lips pressed into a thin line. Amara, unfazed, opened her tablet again, her focus returning to her work. But she was watching, always watching, because she knew the real test of her airline wasn't in the leather seats or the champagne. It was in how every passenger was treated, from the tycoon to the nobody. This moment, though, was just the beginning. Rachel's initial slight was a spark, and the cabin was about to ignite with tension that would expose not just one woman's prejudice, but the power of standing firm in the face of it. Amara's quiet strength, Rachel's unchecked bias, and the passengers' silent judgments were all threads in a story that would unravel in ways none of them could foresee. As the jet's engines began to hum, preparing for takeoff, the stage was set for a confrontation that would leave a lasting mark on everyone aboard. Amara Johnson sat in seat 3A, her tablet now closed, her gaze drifting to the clouds outside the window. But her mind was sharp, attuned to every detail of the cabin's dynamics. She'd felt the sting of Rachel Bennett's dismissive greeting earlier. But now, as the flight attendant moved through the aisle, Amara braced for what she sensed was coming. Rachel, with her crisp navy uniform and tightly pinned auburn hair, carried a tray of sparkling water, her smile reserved for the Carters, who were now engrossed in a quiet chat about their upcoming charity gala in Los Angeles. Rachel's warmth toward them was palpable. She refilled their glasses, asked about their plans, and even chuckled at Mr. Carter's dry joke about the stock market. But when she approached Amara, her demeanor shifted like a cold front rolling in. "Excuse me, ma'am," Rachel said, her voice clipped, her eyes narrowing as she stood over Amara's seat. "I need you to confirm your seat assignment. This section is for our elite passengers." The words were polite on the surface, but the undertone was unmistakable. Condescension laced with an assumption that Amara didn't belong. Amara met Rachel's gaze, her expression steady, her voice calm but firm. I'm in the right seat. You can check the passenger manifest if you're unsure. Rachel's lips pressed into a thin line, her irritation flickering like a warning light. I don't need to check, she snapped, loud enough to draw glances from nearby passengers. I know who's supposed to be here. The cabin grew quieter, the air thickening with tension. Michael Torres, the real estate investor across the aisle, looked up from his laptop, his brow furrowing as he caught the edge in Rachel's tone. He shifted in his seat, his instincts honed from years of navigating high-stakes deals, sensing something off. Evelyn Harper, the socialite, leaned forward, her champagne glass forgotten, whispering to her companion. She's probably trying to sneak into a better seat. Evelyn's words carried just far enough to sting, but Amara didn't flinch. She'd heard worse in her climb to the top. Backhanded comments in boardrooms, skeptical glances at tech conferences. Growing up in Chicago's South Side, she'd learned to armor herself with resilience, turning slights into fuel for her ambition. Still, the public nature of this moment, with all eyes on her, tested her resolve. Rachel, emboldened by the lack of pushback, pressed on. If you don't move to the back, I'll have to call security when we land, she said, her voice rising, her arms crossing defiantly. The threat hung in the air, and Sarah Miller, the junior flight attendant, froze near the galley, her hands clutching a stack of napkins. Sarah's heart raced. She'd seen Rachel's sharp side before, but this felt different. Wrong. Raised in a small Ohio town where fairness was a family value, Sarah wanted to speak up, to suggest checking the manifest as Amara had calmly proposed, but the fear of losing her job kept her silent. She glanced at Amara, whose poised demeanor seemed to radiate a quiet strength, and felt a pang of guilt for staying quiet. Amara, sensing Sarah's hesitation, offered her a small, reassuring nod, as if to say, "You'll know when to act." The gesture unsettled Rachel, who mistook it for defiance. "Don't test me," Rachel said, stepping closer, her voice now a low hiss. "You're causing a scene, and it's embarrassing for everyone." Michael, unable to stay silent, leaned forward. "With all due respect," he said, his tone polite but firm, "it sounds like you're the one making this a scene. Why not just check the list?" Rachel's face flushed, her authority challenged in front of the cabin. "Sir, this doesn't concern you," she shot back, but her confidence wavered. Evelyn Harper, catching the exchange, whispered again, "Why doesn't she just move? It's not worth the fuss." Her companion nodded, but others weren't so quick to judge. "Mr." Carter set down his newspaper, his eyes narrowing as he watched Rachel's escalating aggression. "Mrs." Carter paused her embroidery, her fingers still, sensing the unease spreading through the cabin. Amara, still seated, adjusted her posture slightly, her hands resting calmly on her lap. "I'm not moving," she said, her voice even, almost soothing, but carrying an undeniable weight. "You're making assumptions, and that's a mistake," Rachel scoffed, waving off the warning. "A mistake? The only mistake here is you thinking you can sit where you don't belong." The words landed like a slap, and the cabin grew deathly quiet. Passengers exchanging uneasy glances, some, uncomfortable, looked away, pretending to focus on their drinks or phones. Others, like Michael, stared openly, their disapproval clear. Sarah, still hovering near the galley, felt her stomach twist. She'd read about incidents like this, flight attendants singling out passengers based on appearance, stories that made headlines and sparked lawsuits. Just last year, a major airline had settled a $10 million discrimination case after a black passenger was wrongly removed from a flight. Sarah knew checking the manifest would take seconds, but Rachel's glare kept her rooted in place. Amara, meanwhile, reached for her phone, her movements deliberate. She typed a quick message, her fingers steady, then set the device back on the armrest. "You'll want to rethink this," she said softly, her words carrying a quiet authority that made Rachel pause, if only for a moment. But Rachel, fueled by her own biases and the pressure to maintain control, doubled down. "I know exactly what I'm doing," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Now get up, or I'll make sure you regret it." The threat echoed through the cabin, and passengers shifted uncomfortably, some whispering, others recording discreetly on their phones. Michael shook his head, muttering under his breath. "This isn't going to end well." Evelyn, despite her earlier gossip, looked uneasy, her fingers tightening around her glass. The Carters exchanged a glance, their expressions unreadable but tinged with concern. Sarah, still frozen, felt a surge of resolve. She wanted to act, to do something. But the weight of Rachel's authority held her back. Amara's eyes never left Rachel's, her calm unshaken. But beneath it was a steely determination forged through years of overcoming obstacles others couldn't imagine. She knew this moment wasn't just about her. It was about every person who'd ever been judged unfairly, dismissed, or humiliated because of who they were. As the jet soared higher, the tension in the cabin crackled like static, setting the stage for a confrontation that would expose raw truths and demand accountability. Amara's quiet strength was a beacon, and Rachel's unchecked prejudice was about to collide with a force she couldn't anticipate. Rachel's earlier threat to have Amara removed hung heavy in the air, and the cabin felt like a pressure cooker ready to burst. "I'm done asking nicely," Rachel said, her voice sharp and loud enough to silence the murmurs around her. "You're in a seat you didn't pay for, and you're making this harder than it needs to be." Her words were laced with a mix of frustration and disdain, her auburn bun trembling slightly as she leaned forward, her face inches from Amara's. Amara, her dark eyes steady, responded with a measured tone that carried a quiet power. "You're wrong about the seat, and you're wrong to assume I don't belong here. Check the manifest, and we can clear this up." Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but it held an edge that made Rachel's jaw tighten. The passengers were now fully engrossed. Michael Torres, the real estate investor, gripped his armrest, his disapproval of Rachel's behavior evident in his furrowed brow. He'd seen this kind of scene before. Not on a plane, but in boardrooms where snap judgments based on appearance led to costly mistakes. Evelyn Harper, the socialite, whispered to her companion. "She's got some nerve, staying put like that." But her tone wavered, betraying a flicker of doubt about her earlier assumptions. Sarah Miller, the junior flight attendant, stood frozen near the galley, her hands twisting a napkin into knots. She knew Rachel's demand was unfair. Amara's suggestion to check the manifest was reasonable, and Sarah had seen the passenger list herself, though she hadn't dared to speak up. Growing up in a small Ohio town, Sarah had been taught to treat everyone with kindness, but the fear of losing her job at Horizon Airlines, a company she'd dreamed of working for, kept her silent. She caught Amara's eye again, and the subtle nod Amara gave her felt like a lifeline, urging her to find her courage. Rachel, oblivious to the shifting dynamics, pressed on. "I don't need a list to know you're out of place," she snapped, her voice carrying a venom that made even Evelyn flinch. "You're causing a disturbance, and I won't have it on my flight." The word "my" dripped with possessiveness, as if Rachel owned the plane itself. Mr. Carter, the retired banker, set his newspaper down entirely, his eyes narrowing as he leaned forward, whispering to his wife. "This is getting out of hand." "Mrs." Carter nodded, her embroidery forgotten, her face etched with concern. The cabin's atmosphere was now thick with anticipation, passengers sensing a storm brewing. Michael, unable to stay quiet any longer, spoke up again, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, why not just check the list? It'll take 2 seconds and save everyone the drama." Rachel whirled on him, her face reddening. "Sir, I'd appreciate it if you stayed out of this. I'm handling it." Her tone was sharp, but Michael didn't back down, his eyes locking with hers. "Doesn't look like you're handling it well," he said, his words drawing a few gasps from nearby passengers. Evelyn's companion stifled a chuckle, and even Evelyn herself looked torn, her earlier gossip now feeling petty in the face of Rachel's escalating aggression. Amara, still seated, adjusted her blazer, her movements deliberate, her calm a stark contrast to Rachel's unraveling composure. "You're making this personal," Amara said softly, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "All I've asked for is the same respect you give everyone else," Rachel scoffed, her arms still crossed. "Respect? You don't get to demand respect when you're sneaking into a seat you don't deserve." The accusation landed like a punch, and the cabin fell silent, the weight of Rachel's words sinking in. Sarah, still clutching her napkin, took a tentative step toward the manifest clipped near the galley, her heart pounding. She wanted to intervene, to point out that Amara's name was likely on the list, but Rachel's glare stopped her cold. "Sarah, stay where you are," Rachel barked, her authority absolute. Sarah's face flushed, her resolve crumbling under the pressure. Amara, sensing the young attendant's struggle, offered her another small nod, a silent encouragement that seemed to say, "You're stronger than you think." The gesture only fueled Rachel's irritation. "Don't act like you're above this," Rachel hissed, stepping closer to Amara, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. "You're not fooling anyone." The passengers were now openly staring, some with phones discreetly raised, capturing the exchange. Michael shook his head, muttering, "This is a lawsuit waiting to happen." He'd read about similar incidents. Last year, a major airline paid $12 million to settle a discrimination case after a passenger was wrongly targeted by a flight attendant. The parallels were uncanny, and Michael's instincts told him this wasn't going to end well for Rachel. Evelyn, despite her earlier whispers, now looked uncomfortable, her fingers fidgeting with her necklace as she realized the situation was spiraling. "Mr." Carter leaned toward his wife again, his voice low. "She's digging her own grave." "Mrs." Carter nodded, her eyes fixed on Amara, who remained a pillar of composure. Amara reached for her phone again, her fingers moving swiftly as she typed another message, her expression unreadable. "You're making a mistake," she said, her voice so calm it sent a chill through the cabin. Rachel laughed, a short, brittle sound. "The only mistake here is you thinking you can talk your way out of this." She gestured towards Sarah. "Get security on the line when we land. This is over." Sarah hesitated, her hands trembling as she reached for the phone near the galley. She knew calling security was wrong. Amara hadn't done anything but stand her ground, but Rachel's authority was suffocating. The passengers watched, some whispering, others shaking their heads. One woman, a middle-aged lawyer in a sharp blazer, murmured to her seatmate, "This is exactly why I carry a copy of my boarding pass." The comment floated through the cabin, adding to the growing unease. Amara's eyes never left Rachel's, her calm a fortress against the flight attendant's storm. She knew this moment was bigger than herself. It was about every person who'd ever been judged, dismissed, or humiliated for how they looked or where they came from. Her years of building Horizon Airlines had taught her that real leadership meant standing firm, even when it was uncomfortable. As Rachel turned away, feigning confidence, a flicker of doubt crossed her face. Amara's unshakable demeanor was unnerving, and for the first time, Rachel wondered if she'd misjudged the situation. The cabin remained tense, the passenger's eyes darting between the two women, sensing that this confrontation was far from over. Amara's quiet strength was a beacon, and Rachel's unchecked bias was about to collide with a truth that would shake the entire flight. Amara Johnson sat resolute in seat 3A, her composure a stark contrast to Rachel Bennett's escalating hostility, which had just reached a dangerous peak with her threat to call security. The passengers, now fully invested in the unfolding drama, watched with a mix of curiosity and unease, their whispers and discreet phone recordings adding to the charged air. Rachel, her face flushed with a mix of anger and self-righteous certainty, stood over Amara, her voice sharp as she doubled down. "This is your last chance," she said, her words slicing through the cabin's soft jazz backdrop. "Move to the back now, or you'll be escorted off this plane the second we land." Her tone was loud, deliberate, meant to assert dominance, but Amara remained unmoved. Her dark eyes locked on Rachel's with a calm that seemed to unnerve the flight attendant. "You're letting your assumptions cloud your judgment," Amara said, her voice steady, almost gentle, but carrying a weight that made the passengers lean in. "Check the manifest. It's that simple." Rachel's lips curled into a sneer, her years of experience making her confident in her authority. But her biases, honed by a career of snap judgments about who belonged in first class, blinded her to the truth. "I don't need a list to know you're out of place," she snapped, her voice carrying a venom that drew gasps from nearby passengers. Michael Torres, the real estate investor, clenched his jaw, his fingers tapping restlessly on his armrest. He'd seen this kind of behavior before. Colleagues dismissed for their accent, clients overlooked for their skin color, and it stirred a quiet anger in him. Evelyn Harper, the socialite, shifted uncomfortably, her earlier gossip now feeling small as she sensed the situation spiraling beyond petty drama. Sarah Miller, the junior flight attendant, stood near the galley, her heart pounding as she gripped the edge of a counter, torn between her instinct to intervene and the fear of Rachel's wrath. Sarah's small-town Ohio upbringing had taught her to stand up for what's right. But the stakes felt higher here, on a private jet filled with America's elite. She glanced at Amara, whose calm nod seemed to urge her forward, but Rachel's sharp glare kept her rooted. The tension escalated when Rachel, carrying a tray of sparkling water, moved down the aisle with purposeful strides. Amara, adjusting her position to stretch her legs slightly into the aisle, caught Rachel's eye, instead of stepping around. Rachel deliberately altered her path, her polished shoe striking Amara's leg. The tray tilted, and 2 glasses of water splashed onto Amara's tailored slacks, soaking her lap and dripping onto the floor. Rachel gasped theatrically, her voice booming. "Look at the mess you've caused," she exclaimed, her tone accusing, as if Amara had orchestrated the spill. The passengers turned, startled, some murmuring in surprise. Amara, her blazer now damp, looked up, her expression still composed but her eyes narrowing slightly. "You walked into me," she said, her voice calm but firm, brushing water from her slacks with deliberate care. "All I've asked is to be treated with the same respect as everyone else." Rachel's face reddened, her control slipping. "Respect?" she hissed, stepping closer. "You're causing trouble, and now you've ruined my tray." The accusation was absurd, and the passengers knew it. Michael shook his head, muttering, "Unbelievable." Mr. Carter, the retired banker, folded his arms, his expression darkening, while Mrs. Carter set her embroidery aside, her lips pursed in disapproval. Evelyn, for the first time, looked genuinely uncomfortable, her fingers fidgeting with her necklace as she realized Rachel's behavior was crossing a line. Sarah, witnessing the spill, felt a surge of outrage. She'd seen Rachel's deliberate move, and it wasn't an accident. She took a step forward, her voice trembling. "Maybe we should just..." But Rachel cut her off with a glare. "Stay out of this! Sarah!" she snapped, her authority absolute. The cabin's tension reached a fever pitch, and in a shocking moment, Rachel's frustration boiled over. Unable to contain herself, she raised her hand and slapped Amara across the face, the sound echoing like a thunderclap through the cabin. Gasps erupted. Michael half stood, his face a mask of disbelief. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, and Sarah's eyes widened, her breath catching. Even the lawyer passenger, who'd been quietly observing, muttered, "That's assault." Amara, her cheek stinging, slowly straightened, her hand resting calmly on her lap, her expression unchanged, but her eyes burning with a quiet fire. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," she said, her voice low, cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. The passengers froze, the weight of her words sinking in. Sarah, her hands trembling, slipped toward the galley phone, her resolve finally breaking through her fear. She dialed a number, whispering urgently. "We have a situation on board." Rachel, oblivious to Sarah's call, stood her ground, her chest heaving. But a flicker of doubt crossed her face as Amara's unyielding calm began to unnerve her. "You think you can talk to me like that?" Rachel spat, but her voice shook, betraying her uncertainty. Amara didn't respond, her silence more powerful than any retort. Her gaze locked on Rachel's as if seeing through her. Michael, now fully standing, addressed Rachel directly. "You need to back off," he said, his voice steady but laced with anger. "You're way out of line." The Carters nodded in agreement, their earlier neutrality replaced by clear disapproval. Evelyn, her earlier smugness gone, whispered to her companion, "This is bad." The cabin was a powder keg, the passenger's phone still recording, capturing every moment of Rachel's unraveling. Amara reached for her phone again, typing another message with deliberate precision, her calm a stark contrast to the chaos Rachel had ignited. The lawyer passenger leaned toward her seatmate, whispering, "I've seen cases like this. Last year, a flight attendant was fired and sued for less." The reference was to a 2024 incident where a major airline faced a $15 million lawsuit after a passenger was assaulted by crew. A story that had dominated headlines. Sarah, now back at her post, felt her heart race. She knew Rachel's actions were indefensible, and her call to management would change everything. The passengers, sensing the gravity of the moment, waited in silence, their eyes darting between Amara's serene strength and Rachel's faltering bravado. Rachel, for the first time, felt a chill of doubt. She'd let her biases and frustration take over, and Amara's unshakable demeanor was starting to make her question everything. The jet soared on, but the real turbulence was in the cabin, where a single moment of prejudice was about to collide with a truth that would shake Rachel to her core. Amara sat in seat 3A, her cheek still stinging but her composure unbroken, her dark eyes locked on Rachel with a calm that radiated authority. Rachel, her face flushed with a mix of defiance and creeping doubt, stood frozen, her hand trembling slightly as the weight of her actions began to sink in. The passengers, Michael Torres, Evelyn Harper, the Carters, and others, watched in rapt attention, sensing a shift in the cabin's power dynamic. Sarah Miller, the junior flight attendant, stood near the galley, her heart pounding after her whispered call to management, her small-town Ohio values finally overriding her fear of Rachel's wrath. Amara's words, "You just made the worst mistake of your life," hung in the air like a verdict, their quiet intensity sending a shiver through the cabin. Rachel tried to regain control, her voice shaking as she snapped, "Don't threaten me. You're the one who's going to regret this." But her bravado was crumbling. Amara's unshakable calm and the passengers' shifting allegiances were unnerving her. Michael, the real estate investor, stood fully now, his voice steady but firm. "You assaulted a passenger," he said, his tone carrying the weight of someone who'd seen injustice before. "You need to step back before this gets worse." Evelyn Harper, the socialite, clutched her necklace, her earlier gossip replaced by a dawning realization that she'd misjudged Amara. "This is awful," she whispered to her companion, her face pale. Mr. Carter, the retired banker, leaned toward his wife, muttering, "She's done for." Mrs. Carter nodded, her embroidery long forgotten, her eyes fixed on Amara with a mix of admiration and concern. Sarah, emboldened by Amara's quiet strength, took a tentative step forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Rachel, maybe we should just check the manifest now." Rachel whirled on her eyes blazing. "I told you to stay out of this," she hissed, but her voice cracked, betraying her unease, before the situation could escalate further. The cockpit door swung open, and the pilot, James Carter, stepped into the cabin, his face pale but resolute. His presence commanded attention, and the passengers fell silent, sensing a turning point. "Rachel," he said, his voice firm but measured. "Step aside. I just got a call from Horizon's management." Rachel's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. "What are you talking about?" she stammered, her arms uncrossing as she took a step back. James's gaze flicked to Amara, then back to Rachel. "The owner of this plane, and Horizon Airlines, is on board. It's Ms. Amara Johnson." The words hit the cabin like a thunderbolt, and gasps rippled through the passengers. Michael nodded slowly, as if he'd suspected something all along, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Evelyn's jaw dropped, her champagne glass nearly slipping from her hand as she whispered, "She owns the airline?" The Carters exchanged a look of quiet vindication, while the lawyer passenger muttered, "This is about to get interesting." Sarah's face lit up with relief, her earlier guilt easing as she realized her call had set the truth in motion. Rachel, her face draining of color, shook her head. "That's impossible," she stammered, her voice barely audible. "There's got to be a mistake." Amara, still seated, adjusted her damp blazer with deliberate grace, her eyes never leaving Rachel's. She stood slowly, her movements measured, her presence commanding the cabin without a raised voice. "There's no mistake," she said, her voice clear and resonant, cutting through the stunned silence. "I'm Amara Johnson, founder and owner of Horizon Airlines. This is my plane, and you, Rachel, have disgraced it with your behavior." The passengers erupted into murmurs, some nodding in support, others staring at Rachel in disbelief. Evelyn, now visibly ashamed, sank back in her seat, her earlier whispers haunting her. Michael crossed his arms, his respect for Amara evident in his steady gaze. Sarah, standing by the galley, felt a surge of pride. She'd made the right call, even if it had terrified her. Rachel's mouth opened and closed, no words coming out, her earlier confidence reduced to a shadow. I didn't know," she whispered, her voice trembling, her eyes darting around the cabin for support that wasn't there. Amara's expression hardened, but her tone remained calm, deliberate. "You didn't know because you didn't care to know," she said, her words piercing. "You judged me based on what you saw, not who I am. You humiliated me in front of these passengers, and you assaulted me. That's not just a mistake. It's unacceptable." The cabin was silent, the weight of Amara's words settling over everyone. Michael spoke up, his voice steady. "She's right. You didn't even try to treat her like everyone else." The Carters nodded, and even Evelyn, her face flushed with embarrassment, murmured agreement. Sarah, now standing taller, felt a spark of courage. She'd been part of this moment, however small her role. The pilot, James, stepped forward, his expression professional but firm. Miss Johnson, management has instructed us to make an unscheduled landing in Chicago to address this. Authorities will meet us on the tarmac. Rachel's face turned ashen, her hands shaking as she realized the gravity of her actions. Please, Ms. Johnson, she stammered, her voice breaking. I didn't mean. I'm sorry. Amara held up a hand, silencing her. Your apology doesn't erase what you did, she said, her tone cold but composed. You had a choice to treat me with respect, like you did the Carters, like you did everyone else here. You chose prejudice instead. The passengers watched in awe, some recording, others simply absorbing the moment. The lawyer passenger leaned toward her seatmate, whispering, This is textbook assault. Last year, a case like this cost an airline $15 million. The reference was to a 2024 incident that had sparked nationwide outrage, and the parallels were undeniable. Sarah, now fully committed, stepped closer to Amara, her voice soft but clear. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner, Ms. Johnson, she said, her eyes earnest. Amara offered her a small, reassuring smile. You did the right thing when it mattered. Sarah, that's enough. The jet began its descent toward Chicago O'Hare, the engine's hum a steady backdrop to the cabin's charged atmosphere. Rachel stood alone, her earlier bravado gone, replaced by a dawning panic as she realized the consequences of her actions were closing in. Amara, still standing, addressed the passengers briefly, her voice steady. I'm sorry you had to witness this, she said, her gaze sweeping the cabin. This isn't the experience I want for anyone on my airline. The passengers nodded, some offering murmurs of support, their respect for Amara palpable, as the jet descended. The truth of Amara's identity hung over the cabin like a storm cloud, and Rachel's world began to crumble under the weight of her own choices. The hum of the jet's engines faded as the plane rolled to a stop on the tarmac, where a sleek black SUV waited, flanked by two police officers in crisp uniforms, their faces serious under the midday sun. Amara's words, "This isn't the experience I want for anyone on my airline," lingered in the air, a promise of accountability that gave the passengers a sense of closure and admiration. Rachel, her hands shaking, took a step back, her voice barely a whisper as she stammered. Ms. Johnson, please, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Her plea was desperate, but Amara's expression remained resolute, her dark eyes unwavering. Your apology comes too late, she said, her tone firm but not cruel. You chose to judge me, to humiliate me, and to assault me, all because of your assumptions. Actions have consequences. Rachel, the pilot, James Carter, stood nearby, his posture professional as he nodded to Amara. The authorities are here. Ms. Johnson, he said, gesturing toward the open cabin door where the officers were ascending the steps. The passengers watched, some with phones still raised, capturing the moment that felt like the climax of a courtroom drama. Michael Torres, the real estate investor, leaned back in his seat, his arms crossed, a quiet nod of respect for Amara's strength. Evelyn Harper, the socialite, sat silently, her earlier gossip replaced by a humbled stillness, her fingers no longer fidgeting but clasped tightly in her lap. Sarah Miller, the junior flight attendant, stood near the galley, her eyes bright with a mix of relief and pride. She'd made the call that brought the truth to light, and Amara's earlier words of encouragement had given her the courage to act. The officers stepped into the cabin, their presence commanding immediate attention. Ms. Johnson, one said respectfully, we've received your report. Are you pressing charges? Amara's gaze didn't waver. Yes, she said, her voice clear and steady. This was an assault, witnessed by everyone here. I expect accountability. Rachel gasped, her hands flying to her face as the second officer produced a pair of handcuffs. "Ma'am," he said to Rachel, his tone neutral, "you're under arrest for assault. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Rachel's knees buckled, tears streaming down her face as she tried to protest. "It was a mistake. I didn't mean it," she sobbed. But the officers gently guided her toward the exit, her once crisp uniform now seeming to hang limply on her defeated frame. The passengers watched in silence, their earlier murmurs replaced by a sobering realization of justice unfolding. Mr. Carter, the retired banker, gave a small nod of approval, while Mrs. Carter whispered, "She brought this on herself." The lawyer passenger, who'd referenced a similar $15 million airline lawsuit from 2024, leaned toward her seatmate, muttering, "This is going to be a PR nightmare for Horizon if they don't handle it right." But Amara was already steps ahead, as Rachel was led away. Amara turned to the passengers, her voice calm but resonant. "I apologize for the disruption," she said, her gaze sweeping the cabin. "This isn't the standard I set for Horizon Airlines. Moving forward, I'll ensure every passenger is treated with the dignity they deserve." The cabin erupted into soft applause, Michael leading with a firm clap, followed by the Carters and even Evelyn, who joined hesitantly, her face flushed with shame. Sarah, standing taller now, felt a surge of gratitude when Amara approached her. "Sarah," Amara said, her tone softening, "your call to management showed integrity. You'll hear from my office about a promotion." Sarah's eyes widened, her voice catching as she whispered, "Thank you, Ms. Johnson." The moment was warm, a beacon of hope amidst the tension. As Amara stepped off the plane, her two assistants from the SUV greeted her with deference, briefing her on her next meeting, a $500 million investment deal in Los Angeles. The passengers, now boarding a new flight to continue their journey, buzzed with admiration, some sharing the recorded footage on social media, where hashtags like Respect for All and Horizon Justice began trending, amassing 1.5 million mentions within hours. Weeks later, Amara appeared on a CNN interview, her poised demeanor captivating the audience. "Respect is a right, not a privilege," she said, her voice steady. "I founded Horizon to create experiences where everyone feels valued, no matter who they are." She announced a $12 million training program for Horizon staff, focusing on cultural sensitivity and anti-discrimination, a move praised by industry analysts who noted similar initiatives by Delta and United in 2024. Rachel, after her arrest, faced assault charges and a public reckoning, but she enrolled in diversity training, beginning a slow journey toward understanding her biases. Sarah, now a lead flight attendant, carried Amara's lesson forward, ensuring her crew treated every passenger with care. Michael, inspired by Amara's resolve, partnered with Horizon on a sustainability project, while Evelyn wrote a heartfelt op-ed in a local paper, apologizing for her initial judgment and urging others to rethink their biases, garnering 6,000 online shares. On a subsequent flight, Amara boarded to a warm welcome from a new crew, their genuine smiles reflecting the change she'd sparked. As the jet soared over the Midwest, Amara gazed out at the horizon, a quiet smile on her lips. She knew this wasn't just about one incident. It was about reshaping an industry. Her public statement, released days later, went viral. "Luxury isn't about wealth. It's about how we treat each other." The video, viewed 3 million times, inspired conversations across America, from coffee shops to corporate boardrooms, about respect and accountability. Amara's actions had turned a moment of injustice into a movement, proving that true leadership isn't about power. It's about lifting others up, even in the face of prejudice. As Horizon Airlines grew, now valued at $2.5 billion, Amara's vision became a beacon, ensuring every passenger, from the tycoon to the traveler, felt seen and valued. If Amara's fight for respect moved you, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below. Share where you're watching from and your thoughts. Let's spread this story of justice far and wide.